The morning sun cast long shadows across the ancient stone corridors of Windsor Castle as King Charles III walked slowly through the grand hallways, his footsteps echoing against the centuries-old walls. He paused at each doorway, his experienced eye taking in every detail of the rooms that had housed British royalty for nearly 1,000 years. Today marked the beginning of something extraordinary, a complete transformation that would blend the castle's rich heritage with his own personal vision for the monarchy's future. Charles had been planning this moment for decades, long before he ascended to the throne. Even as Prince of Wales, he had spent countless hours sketching ideas, consulting with historians, and dreaming of how he might one day modernize these historic spaces while preserving their essential character. Now, with the crown finally upon his head, he possessed both the authority and the responsibility to make those dreams reality. The king stopped before a massive oak door that led to what had once been his mother's private sitting room. Queen Elizabeth II had kept this space largely unchanged for 70 years, maintaining the same floral wallpaper, the same heavy curtains, and the same formal arrangement of furniture that spoke of duty and tradition above all else. Charles pushed open the door and stepped inside, immediately feeling the weight of history and the challenge that lay ahead. He had invited Lady Margaret Thornberry, Britain's most renowned interior designer, to meet him here this morning. Lady Margaret had worked on several royal residences over the years, but never on a project of this magnitude. She understood both the sensitivity required when dealing with royal properties and the innovative spirit that Charles brought to everything he touched. Her reputation for blending classical elegance with contemporary functionality made her the perfect choice for this ambitious undertaking. As Charles examined the room more closely, he began to envision the changes he wanted to make. The heavy velvet drapes would be replaced with lighter fabrics that would allow more natural light to flood the space. The formal seating arrangement would give way to more intimate conversation areas that would encourage genuine connection rather than ceremonial stiffness. Most importantly, he wanted to incorporate elements that reflected his lifelong commitment to environmental sustainability and his passion for organic gardening. Lady Margaret arrived precisely at 9 o'clock, accompanied by a small team of assistants carrying fabric samples, color charts, and architectural drawings. She had studied the castle's history extensively in preparation for this meeting, understanding that every change they made would need to respect the building's significance while serving the practical needs of a modern monarchy. "Your Majesty," she said with a respectful curtsy, "I've brought some initial concepts based on our previous conversations. I believe we can create spaces that honor the past while embracing your vision for the future." Charles smiled warmly, immediately putting the design team at ease. Despite his royal status, he had always been known for his approachable manner and genuine interest in the people who worked with him. "Please, let's dispense with excessive formality," he said. "We have important work to do, and I want everyone to feel comfortable sharing their ideas freely." They began with the throne room, a space that had remained virtually unchanged since Queen Victoria's time. The massive gilded throne sat on a raised dais surrounded by portraits of past monarchs and ceremonial weapons that spoke of Britain's imperial past. Charles had specific ideas about how this room should evolve to reflect his more modern approach to kingship. "I want this space to feel less intimidating," he explained, gesturing toward the imposing throne. "When people come here, they should feel welcomed into a conversation, not summoned before judgment. The monarchy must be accessible while maintaining its dignity." Lady Margaret nodded thoughtfully, making notes as she listened. She had anticipated this request, knowing Charles's reputation for wanting to break down barriers between the royal family and the British people. "We could create seating areas around the perimeter," she suggested, places where guests could sit comfortably while still maintaining the proper protocol for royal audiences. The king's eyes lit up at this suggestion. "Exactly. And I'd like to incorporate more natural elements, perhaps some of the rare plants from my organic gardens at Highgrove. Living things bring warmth to any space, and they represent growth and renewal." As they moved through the castle, Charles shared stories about each room, explaining not just what he wanted to change, but why those changes mattered to him. In the dining hall, he spoke about his desire to showcase British craftsmanship and support local artisans. The current furnishings, while historically significant, had been imported from various European workshops over the centuries. Charles wanted to commission new pieces from contemporary British makers, creating modern heirlooms that would serve future generations. "I've been corresponding with a furniture maker in the Cotswolds," Charles explained, running his hand along a centuries-old dining table. His work combines traditional techniques with innovative design. I believe we should be patrons of today's craftspeople, not just custodians of yesterday's treasures. Lady Margaret was impressed by the king's knowledge and passion. She had worked with wealthy clients before, but Charles's understanding of design principles, historical context, and environmental considerations surpassed that of most professional decorators. His vision wasn't simply about creating beautiful spaces, it was about using those spaces to communicate values and inspire positive change. The library presented particular challenges and opportunities. The room housed one of Britain's most significant private book collections, with manuscripts and first editions dating back centuries. Charles wanted to preserve the scholarly atmosphere while making the space more conducive to actual reading and research, rather than mere display. Books should be read, not just admired, he said, pulling a leather-bound volume from one of the towering shelves. I want reading nooks with proper lighting, comfortable chairs where people can actually spend hours with these treasures. Knowledge shouldn't be locked away behind glass cases. They discussed installing discreet modern lighting systems that would protect the ancient books while making them more accessible to scholars and visitors. Charles also wanted to create a digital archive that would allow people around the world to access the collection virtually, extending the library's reach far beyond the castle walls. The conversation turned to the private family quarters, spaces where Charles could express his personal taste more freely while still maintaining the dignity appropriate to a royal residence. He spoke about his love of traditional British textiles, his appreciation for handcrafted furniture, and his desire to create rooms that felt like home rather than museum displays. Camilla and I want spaces where our children and grandchildren feel comfortable, he explained. Royal or not, every family needs places where they can be themselves, where formality gives way to genuine warmth and connection. Lady Margaret showed him fabric samples and color palettes that reflected his preferences, rich earth tones inspired by the British countryside, subtle patterns that referenced traditional designs without copying them exactly, and textures that invited touch rather than demanding distance. Every choice would need to balance personal taste with public expectations, creating rooms that felt both intimate and appropriately regal. The morning extended into afternoon as they explored wing after wing of the massive castle. Charles had ideas for every space, from the grand ballroom where state dinners would welcome world leaders, to the small chapel where he hoped to host more intimate ceremonies that reflected his inclusive vision of faith and community. In the portrait gallery, he wanted to expand beyond the traditional display of royal ancestors to include images that told the broader story of British history and culture. We should honor not just kings and queens, he said, but the scientists, artists, writers, and ordinary citizens who built this nation. The monarchy serves the people, and our surroundings should reflect that truth. The technical challenges were immense. Windsor Castle was a protected historical monument, which meant that every change required approval from heritage committees and conservation experts. Modern conveniences like improved heating, lighting, and security systems would need to be integrated invisibly, preserving the castle's historical integrity while meeting contemporary needs. Lady Margaret's team would need to work closely with historians, architects, engineers, and craftspeople to ensure that every modification enhanced, rather than diminished, the building's significance. They would also need to coordinate with the castle's daily operations, as these spaces continued to serve as working government facilities even during renovation. As the day concluded, Charles and Lady Margaret stood in the castle's central courtyard, looking up at the towers and battlements that had witnessed nearly a millennium of British history. The scope of their project was daunting, but both felt energized by the possibilities ahead. This isn't just about decorating rooms, Charles reflected, his voice filled with quiet determination. We're creating spaces that will shape how people understand the monarchy's role in modern Britain. Every choice we make will send a message about our values, our priorities, and our vision for the future. Lady Margaret nodded, understanding the weight of responsibility they both carried. Your Majesty, I believe we can create something truly extraordinary. Spaces that honor the past while inspiring the future. Rooms that feel both timelessly elegant and refreshingly contemporary. The king smiled, feeling more optimistic than he had in months about the monarchy's ability to evolve and remain relevant in the 21st century. The decoration of Windsor Castle would be more than an interior design project. It would be a statement about the kind of king he intended to be, and the kind of nation he hoped to serve. As evening approached and the first day of planning drew to a close, Charles took one final walk through the corridors that would soon be transformed. In his mind, he could already see the changes taking shape: rooms filled with natural light and living plants, spaces that welcomed conversation and connection, areas that celebrated British creativity while honoring historical tradition. The work ahead would be challenging, expensive, and closely scrutinized by both supporters and critics of the monarchy. But Charles felt confident that this project represented something important: a monarchy willing to change while remaining true to its essential purpose, an institution ready to serve the people in new ways while preserving the best of its ancient heritage. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as they began the detailed planning process, but tonight, Charles felt a sense of excitement he hadn't experienced in years. After decades of preparation, his vision for a more accessible, environmentally conscious, and genuinely British monarchy was finally beginning to take physical form in the very walls that had sheltered his family for generations. The transformation of Windsor Castle had begun, and with it, the transformation of the British monarchy itself. 3 weeks into the Windsor Castle renovation project, the first major crisis erupted with the force of a summer thunderstorm. The morning newspapers blazed with headlines that made King Charles's private secretary wince as he delivered the daily press briefing. King's costly castle makeover while Britain struggles and Charles spends millions on luxury as families choose between heating and eating. Charles sat in his temporary office, a smaller room that had once served as a storage closet, reading each article with growing frustration. The media had somehow obtained detailed information about the project's budget, though the figures quoted were wildly exaggerated. What should have been a story about modernizing a working government facility had been twisted into a tale of royal excess and tone-deaf privilege. The timing couldn't have been worse. Britain was experiencing one of its most challenging economic periods in decades, with inflation driving up the cost of basic necessities and energy bills forcing many families to make difficult choices. Against this backdrop, any royal expenditure faced intense scrutiny, and the renovation project had become a lightning rod for broader frustrations about inequality and government spending. Lady Margaret Thornbury found herself at the center of a media firestorm she had never experienced in her previous work with wealthy private clients. Photographers camped outside her London studio, and reporters called at all hours, seeking quotes about the project's scope and cost. She had been instructed by the palace not to speak to the press, but her silence only fueled more speculation and criticism. The opposition party in Parliament seized on the controversy with predictable enthusiasm. During Prime Minister's questions, the Labour leader rose to demand a full accounting of the renovation costs and questioned whether such expenditures were appropriate when public services face severe budget cuts. While families across Britain struggle to pay their bills, he declared to thunderous applause from his backbenchers, His Majesty apparently requires golden doorknobs and designer wallpaper. Charles watched the parliamentary session on television, his jaw tightening with each exaggerated claim and mischaracterization of his intentions. The renovation had never included golden doorknobs, and most of the work involved necessary infrastructure improvements that had been delayed for decades. The heating system dated to the 1960s and was both inefficient and was unreliable. The electrical wiring hadn't been updated since the 1980s and posed genuine safety concerns. But these practical details were lost in the political theater and media sensationalism. The king called an emergency meeting with his senior advisors to address the growing crisis. The palace's communications team had been caught off guard by the intensity of the backlash and struggled to develop an effective response strategy. Some advisors recommended suspending the project indefinitely to avoid further controversy, while others argued that backing down would only embolden critics and make the monarchy appear weak and indecisive. "We're not just dealing with criticism of a renovation project," explained Sir William Pembridge, the palace's most experienced communications advisor. "This has become a symbol of deeper tensions about the monarchy's role and relevance in modern Britain. Our response will be seen as indicative of how Your Majesty intends to handle controversy throughout your reign." Charles appreciated the gravity of the situation but remained committed to his vision. He had spent too many years planning these changes to abandon them at the first sign of political pressure. More importantly, he believed that the criticism was based on misunderstandings that could be addressed through patient explanation and transparency. "I want to visit some of the families who are struggling with their energy bills," Charles announced, surprising his advisors with this unexpected proposal. "If people think I'm out of touch with their daily concerns, then I need to demonstrate otherwise through direct engagement, not just through press releases." The suggestion alarmed the security team, who preferred controlled environments for royal appearances. Visiting ordinary families in their homes presented logistical challenges and potential security risks that made everyone nervous. But Charles was insistent, understanding that authentic connection with the public was the only way to address the growing perception that he was an aloof monarch obsessed with luxury while his subjects suffered. Meanwhile, at Windsor Castle, the renovation work had slowed to a crawl as contractors and craftspeople found themselves reluctant to be associated with such a controversial project. Several suppliers had already received threatening phone calls from angry members of the public, and some workers reported being confronted by protesters outside the castle gates. Lady Margaret struggled to maintain momentum on the project while managing the personal attacks on her professional reputation. Social media was particularly brutal, with anonymous accounts posting false information about her background and previous work. The stress was affecting her entire team, and she wondered privately whether she should withdraw from the project to protect her business and her family from further harassment. The Heritage Conservation Committee, which had initially approved the renovation plans, now found themselves under intense scrutiny from both preservationists who opposed any changes to the historic building and budget hawks who questioned every expenditure. Committee members who had previously praised the king's thoughtful approach to modernization suddenly distanced themselves from the project, claiming they had never fully endorsed the scope of work being undertaken. Charles decided to take an unprecedented step in royal protocol by granting an exclusive television interview to address the controversy directly. His communications team was horrified by this decision, preferring the traditional approach of letting storms pass without royal comment. But Charles understood that the modern monarchy required more direct communication with the public, especially during times of crisis. The interview was scheduled for the following week, giving Charles time to prepare his message carefully. He wanted to explain not just what he was doing at Windsor Castle, but why these changes mattered for the future of the monarchy and the country. The challenge would be communicating his vision in a way that acknowledged public concerns while maintaining his commitment to necessary modernization. As news of the upcoming interview spread, it generated even more media attention and speculation. Royal watchers debated whether Charles was making a wise decision or setting a dangerous precedent by responding directly to criticism. Some praised his willingness to engage with public concerns, while others worried that any royal statement would only provide more ammunition for critics and draw the monarchy deeper into political controversy. The king spent hours preparing for the interview, working with his communications team to anticipate difficult questions and develop clear, compelling responses. He wanted to be honest about the project's costs, while explaining the long-term benefits and necessity of the work. Most importantly, he wanted to demonstrate his understanding of the economic pressures facing ordinary British families and his commitment to using royal resources responsibly. The day before the interview, Charles made an unannounced visit to a family in Birmingham, whose story had been featured prominently in the media coverage of the renovation controversy. The Johnsons, a working-class family with 3 young children, had been forced to choose between heating their home and buying adequate food after their energy bills doubled in 6 months. Charles arrived at their modest terraced house with minimal security and media presence, wanting the encounter to be as natural and private as possible. The family was initially overwhelmed by the unexpected royal visit, but quickly warmed to the king's genuine interest in their situation and his obvious concern for their well-being. Mrs. Johnson showed Charles their latest energy bill, explaining how they had been forced to limit heating to just one room of the house, and how the children wore coats indoors during the coldest evenings. Mr. Johnson, who worked 2 part-time jobs but still struggled to make ends meet, expressed his frustration with a system that seemed designed to benefit the wealthy while ordinary families suffered. Charles listened carefully to their concerns, asking thoughtful questions and taking notes in a small leather journal he always carried. He was particularly moved by their youngest daughter's drawings, which depicted their family bundled in blankets around a small heater. The visit lasted nearly 2 hours, far longer than his schedule allowed. But Charles felt it was crucial to understand personally the reality facing many of his subjects. The family was surprised by the king's down-to-earth manner and his obvious knowledge of the practical challenges they faced. He spoke knowledgeably about energy efficiency measures and government assistance programs, demonstrating that his concern was informed by genuine understanding rather than distant sympathy. As Charles prepared to leave, Mrs. Johnson asked directly about the castle renovation that had generated so much controversy. "Your Majesty," she said respectfully but firmly, "we don't begrudge you having nice things, but it's hard to see money being spent on luxury when families like ours are struggling just to stay warm." Charles appreciated her honesty and used the opportunity to explain his perspective. "I understand your concern completely," he replied. "The work at Windsor isn't about luxury. It's about maintaining a building that serves as both a home and a working government facility. Much of the cost involves updating heating and electrical systems that are decades old and extremely inefficient. In the long run, these improvements will actually save money and reduce environmental impact." The explanation seemed to resonate with the family, who hadn't heard these practical details in the media coverage of the renovation. Charles promised to stay in touch with their situation and to ensure that their story informed his understanding of the challenges facing ordinary British families. The visit had a profound impact on Charles, reinforcing his belief that the monarchy could only remain relevant by staying connected to the real experiences of the people it served. It also strengthened his resolve to complete the Windsor renovation in a way that demonstrated responsibility and environmental consciousness, rather than mere luxury. As he returned to the castle that evening, Charles reflected on the difficult balance between maintaining the dignity and effectiveness of the monarchy while addressing legitimate public concerns about cost and relevance. The interview tomorrow would be crucial in determining whether he could successfully navigate this challenge and emerge with his reputation and his renovation project intact. The stakes were higher than just interior decoration. The way Charles handled this controversy would establish precedents for how his reign would address criticism and engage with public opinion. The future of the modern British monarchy might well depend on his ability to convince his subjects that his vision for Windsor Castle reflected not royal indulgence, but responsible stewardship of national treasures in service of the people. The television interview had gone better than anyone expected, with Charles managing to strike exactly the right tone of humility, determination, and genuine concern for his subjects' welfare. Public opinion polls showed a marked shift in favor of the renovation project after the king's honest explanation of its practical necessity and long-term benefits. More importantly, his visit to the Johnson family had demonstrated a level of personal engagement with ordinary citizens that previous monarchs had rarely achieved. With the immediate crisis manageable, work at Windsor Castle resumed with renewed energy and purpose. Lady Margaret Thornbury felt the weight of public scrutiny lifting slightly, allowing her team to focus on the creative and technical challenges that made this project so extraordinary. They had entered a new phase of the renovation that would reveal surprises no one had anticipated. The discovery came on a Tuesday morning in early November, when contractors working on the foundation of the East Wing uncovered something that would change the entire trajectory of the project. While installing new electrical conduits beneath the floor of what had been Queen Victoria's private study, workers noticed that their drilling equipment was meeting less resistance than expected in certain areas. James Morrison, the project's chief engineer, investigated personally when his crew reported the anomalies. Using ground-penetrating radar equipment, he discovered a series of hollow spaces beneath the castle floor that didn't appear on any architectural drawings or historical plans. The spaces were too regular and extensive to be natural cavities, suggesting they had been deliberately constructed centuries ago. Lady Margaret immediately contacted King Charles, who arrived at the castle within the hour, accompanied by Dr. Helena Richardson, Britain's leading expert on medieval architecture and royal historian. The prospect of undiscovered chambers in Windsor Castle was thrilling, not just for its archaeological significance, but for what it might reveal about the building's hidden history. These spaces appear to connect multiple rooms, Richardson explained as she studied the radar images. The construction techniques suggest they date from the 14th or 15th century, possibly built during the reign of Edward III or one of his successors. They could be anything from storage areas to defensive tunnels to secret escape routes. Charles was fascinated by the implications. Windsor Castle had always been both a royal residence and a military fortress, and the presence of hidden chambers made perfect sense from a security perspective. Medieval kings faced constant threats from rival claimants to the throne, foreign invaders, and domestic rebellions. Secret passages and concealed rooms would have provided crucial advantages during times of danger. The decision of whether to explore these spaces required careful consideration. Opening medieval chambers that had been sealed for centuries posed risks to both the structural integrity of the castle and the preservation of any historical artifacts they might contain. However, the potential for significant archaeological discoveries was too important to ignore. Charles made the decision to proceed with a full archaeological investigation, despite the additional costs and delays this would impose on the renovation project. He understood that this discovery could provide invaluable insights into British history, and might reveal treasures that belonged in national museums rather than remaining hidden beneath castle floors. The archaeological team that assembled over the following days included specialists from Oxford University, the British Museum, and Historic England. They brought sophisticated equipment that could create detailed images of the hidden spaces without immediately disturbing them, allowing for careful planning of any excavation work. Dr. Sarah Cambridge, the lead archaeologist, was amazed by what the imaging revealed. "We're seeing multiple chambers of different sizes," she explained to Charles during a briefing in the castle's library. "Some appear to contain objects, possibly furniture, chests, or other artifacts that have been undisturbed for hundreds of years. This could be one of the most significant archaeological finds in British royal history." The media, which had been following the renovation project closely since the earlier controversy, seized on news of the discovery with enthusiasm. Headlines proclaimed, "King's renovation uncovers royal treasures," and "Charles finds hidden history beneath castle floors." The archaeological angle provided a perfect counter-narrative to earlier criticism, showing that the renovation project was yielding benefits that no one had anticipated. International attention focused on Windsor Castle as historians and archaeologists around the world speculated about what might be found in the sealed chambers. The discovery coincided with preparations for a major state visit from the President of France, adding diplomatic complexity to the archaeological excitement surrounding the project. President Dubois had specifically requested a private tour of the renovation work during his visit, expressing particular interest in the archaeological discoveries. As a former professor of medieval history, before entering politics, he understood the significance of what had been found and wanted to see the work firsthand. Charles saw this as an opportunity to demonstrate how the monarchy's stewardship of national treasures benefited not just Britain but the international community of scholars and history enthusiasts. The state dinner planned for President Dubois would take place in the newly renovated Great Hall, providing a perfect showcase for how historical preservation and modern functionality could coexist beautifully. Lady Margaret worked frantically to complete the Great Hall renovation in time for the state visit. The room needed to function as both a showcase of traditional British craftsmanship and a demonstration of contemporary environmental consciousness. The new lighting system used LED technology disguised within historically accurate fixtures, while the heating system incorporated geothermal energy that would reduce the castle's carbon footprint significantly. The king had insisted on using British-made furniture and textiles throughout the renovated spaces, supporting local craftspeople and businesses while showcasing the country's continuing tradition of excellence in decorative arts. Each piece had been commissioned specifically for the project, creating modern heirlooms that would serve future generations while providing immediate economic benefits to skilled artisans. As the archaeological investigation proceeded, the team made increasingly exciting discoveries. The first chamber they opened contained a collection of medieval manuscripts that had been perfectly preserved by the dry conditions underground. Dr. Cambridge's initial examination suggested these documents included previously unknown correspondence between English kings and their European counterparts, potentially rewriting some aspects of medieval diplomatic history. Charles insisted that all discoveries be shared immediately with the academic community and the general public. He established a special exhibition space within the castle, where visitors could see artifacts as they were uncovered and cleaned, making the archaeological process transparent and educational rather than secretive and exclusive. The second chamber contained something even more extraordinary: a complete set of medieval furniture that appeared to have been hastily stored underground, possibly during the English Civil War when parliamentary forces threatened to destroy royal property. The wooden pieces showed no signs of decay, and the craftsmanship was so exceptional that museum experts compared them to the finest surviving examples of medieval English woodwork. President Dubois arrived at Windsor Castle on a crisp November morning, visibly excited about the opportunity to witness history being uncovered. Charles personally guided the tour of both the renovation work and the archaeological sites, explaining how his vision for the castle's future had unexpectedly revealed treasures from its distant past. "This discovery validates your entire approach," President Dubois commented as they examined the medieval manuscripts in the conservation laboratory. "By investing in proper maintenance and modernization of historical buildings, you've uncovered knowledge that benefits all of humanity. This is exactly what modern monarchy should achieve, serving as custodian of cultural treasures while making them accessible to scholars and the public." The French president's endorsement provided valuable international credibility for the renovation project and helped counter remaining domestic criticism. When world leaders praised the king's stewardship of national heritage, it became much more difficult for political opponents to characterize the project as wasteful royal indulgence. The state dinner that evening was a triumph of both diplomacy and design. Lady Margaret's renovation of the Great Hall created an atmosphere that was simultaneously grand and welcoming, formal and comfortable. The British and French flags hung alongside each other from medieval banners, while the dining table showcased contemporary British craftsmanship in silverware, china, and glassware. Charles used his dinner speech to draw connections between the archaeological discoveries and the broader goals of the renovation project. "These chambers remained hidden for centuries because our predecessors understood the importance of preserving treasures for future generations," he said, addressing the assembled diplomats and dignitaries. "Today, we continue that tradition by modernizing this ancient castle in ways that protect its heritage while adapting it for contemporary use." President Dubois responded by announcing that France would contribute funding for the archaeological research and would collaborate with British institutions to study the discovered manuscripts. This international partnership transformed what had begun as a domestic renovation project into a collaborative effort that strengthened diplomatic relationships while advancing historical scholarship. Behind the scenes, Lady Margaret was already planning how to incorporate the archaeological discoveries into her design scheme for the castle's public spaces. The medieval furniture could be displayed in areas where visitors would appreciate its craftsmanship, while the manuscripts would require specially designed exhibition cases that provided proper conservation conditions while allowing scholarly access. The hidden chambers also revealed practical information about the castle's construction that would inform the renovation work. Medieval builders had created surprisingly sophisticated ventilation systems and structural supports that modern engineers could learn from and adapt. Some of the newly discovered spaces could be converted into storage areas or utility rooms, making the castle more functional while preserving their historical significance. As the state visit concluded successfully, Charles reflected on how the archaeological discoveries had transformed public perception of his renovation project. What had begun as a controversial expenditure was now seen as a valuable investment in national heritage that was yielding unexpected benefits for historical scholarship and cultural preservation. The king realized that the hidden chambers represented something larger than their immediate archaeological value. They symbolized the layers of history that existed within all great institutions, the hidden strengths and forgotten treasures that could only be discovered through careful stewardship and thoughtful modernization. The renovation of Windsor Castle was revealing not just physical artifacts, but new understandings of how the past and present could work together to create a better future. With international support secured and public opinion firmly in favor of the project, Charles felt confident that his vision for Windsor Castle would succeed beyond his original expectations. The hidden discoveries had validated his belief that preservation and progress were not opposing forces, but complementary aspects of responsible leadership. Winter arrived at Windsor Castle with an unusual gentleness, as if the ancient stones themselves were embracing the transformation taking place within their walls. King Charles stood in what would soon become the new family sitting room, watching through tall windows as his grandchildren played in the courtyard below, their laughter echoing off the medieval stonework with a joy that seemed to approve of all the changes happening around them. The archaeological excitement had settled into routine scholarly work, and the renovation project had entered its most personal phase. This was the time when Charles could finally implement the intimate details that would make Windsor Castle feel like a true family home rather than merely a grand historical monument. Lady Margaret had prepared dozens of options for fabrics, furnishings, and decorative elements that would reflect the king's personality while maintaining the dignity expected of a royal residence. Queen Camilla played an increasingly important role in these decisions, bringing her own aesthetic sensibilities and practical insights to spaces where she would spend significant portions of her time. Her influence was particularly evident in the private quarters, where she insisted on creating areas that would encourage relaxation and genuine conversation rather than formal ceremony. "I want our grandchildren to feel comfortable here," Camilla explained to Lady Margaret as they reviewed plans for the family rooms. "They should be able to curl up with a book, play games on the floor, or simply sprawl about without worrying about damaging priceless antiques or violating royal protocol." This philosophy presented interesting design challenges. The rooms needed to accommodate both intimate family gatherings and occasions when visiting dignitaries or government officials might need access to the royal family in less formal settings. Lady Margaret solved this by creating flexible spaces with movable furniture and multiple seating arrangements that could be reconfigured depending on the nature of each gathering. Prince William and Princess Catherine brought their own perspectives to the renovation discussions, representing the next generation's vision for the monarchy's future. They were particularly interested in incorporating technology that would allow the castle to serve educational purposes, sharing its treasures and history with people around the world through virtual tours and interactive exhibits. "We have an opportunity to make Windsor Castle a global classroom," William explained during one of the family planning sessions. "Children in schools anywhere should be able to explore these rooms, learn about British history, and understand how the monarchy has evolved over centuries." Charles embraced this idea enthusiastically, seeing it as perfectly aligned with his vision of a more accessible and transparent monarchy. They planned to install discrete cameras and audio equipment that could provide virtual visitors with detailed views of the renovated spaces and expert commentary about their historical significance and contemporary use. The king's personal study received perhaps the most careful attention of any room in the castle. This would be his primary workspace, where he would review government documents, meet with advisors, and conduct the daily business of constitutional monarchy. Charles wanted the space to reflect his interests in architecture, environmental conservation, and organic farming, while providing the technological infrastructure necessary for modern governance. Lady Margaret created a room that felt more like a gentleman's library than a sterile office. Rich leather bindings filled custom-built shelves, while comfortable reading chairs were positioned to take advantage of natural light from the tall windows. A discrete computer workstation provided access to government systems and international communications networks, but the technology was integrated so seamlessly that it never dominated the room's warm, scholarly atmosphere. The walls displayed some of Charles's own watercolor paintings, alongside works by contemporary British artists whose careers he had supported over the years. These personal touches transformed the study from a generic royal office into a space that clearly belonged to this particular king, reflecting his tastes and interests while maintaining appropriate dignity. The renovation of the castle's chapel presented particularly sensitive challenges, as it needed to accommodate Charles's role as head of the Church of England while reflecting his commitment to interfaith dialogue and religious tolerance. The king had always believed that the monarchy should represent all British citizens, regardless of their religious beliefs or lack thereof. Working with religious scholars and community leaders from various faith traditions, Charles created a chapel space that maintained its Christian character while incorporating design elements that acknowledged Britain's religious diversity. The stained glass windows told traditional Christian stories, but new elements referenced the contributions of Jewish, Muslim, Hindu, and Sikh communities to British society. The family dining room renovation revealed interesting dynamics between different generations of the royal family. Charles preferred intimate settings that encouraged conversation and connection, while some of his relatives favored more formal arrangements that emphasized hierarchy and tradition. Lady Margaret navigated these preferences by creating a space that could accommodate both approaches depending on the occasion. The new dining table was crafted from sustainable timber sourced from the king's own estates, representing his commitment to environmental stewardship while supporting British forestry workers. The chairs were designed by a contemporary furniture maker whose work Charles had admired for years, but their traditional proportions and materials ensured they would complement the room's historical character. Princess Anne contributed practical insights based on her extensive experience with royal duties and public appearances. She emphasized the importance of creating spaces that would function efficiently during large receptions and formal events, while remaining comfortable for everyday family use. Her suggestions led to several design modifications that improved traffic flow and made entertaining more manageable for staff. The king's private bedroom and dressing room reflected his personal habits and preferences most clearly. Charles had always been an early riser who enjoyed spending quiet morning hours reading and planning his day, so Lady Margaret created a comfortable sitting area with excellent natural light and easy access to newspapers, books, and correspondence. The dressing room showcased British tailoring and textile traditions, with custom cabinetry designed to display the formal uniforms, ceremonial robes, and everyday clothing that comprised a modern monarch's complex wardrobe. Each piece had its designated place, making the daily ritual of royal dressing more efficient while preserving these garments properly. Queen Camilla's personal spaces reflected her love of literature and gardening. Her sitting room included extensive bookshelves filled with contemporary fiction, biographies, and gardening references, while large windows provided views of the castle gardens that she was helping to redesign. The color scheme was inspired by her favorite flowers, creating a space that felt distinctly feminine without being overly decorative. The renovation of spaces designated for visiting family members required careful consideration of different personalities and preferences. Some relatives preferred traditional grandeur, while others favored more contemporary comfort. Lady Margaret created a variety of guest rooms that could accommodate these different tastes while maintaining overall design coherence throughout the castle. Charles's relationship with his sons added complexity to some renovation decisions. Prince Harry's estrangement from the family created questions about whether spaces should be prepared for his potential future visits, while Prince William's active involvement in royal duties meant that his needs and preferences carried significant weight in planning decisions. The king ultimately decided to create guest spaces that would welcome any family member who chose to visit, regardless of current relationships or circumstances. Families go through difficult periods, he explained to Lady Margaret. Our renovations should reflect hope for reconciliation rather than acceptance of permanent division. The children's areas of the castle received special attention, as Charles wanted his grandchildren to develop positive associations with their royal heritage, rather than viewing it as a burden or obligation. Play areas were designed to be both safe and stimulating, while bedroom spaces could accommodate overnight visits that would allow the young royals to experience life in the castle as something normal and enjoyable rather than merely ceremonial. Lady Margaret incorporated educational elements throughout the children's spaces, with age-appropriate displays about castle history, royal traditions, and the constitutional role of the monarchy. These features were designed to spark curiosity rather than overwhelm young minds, introducing complex concepts through games, stories, and hands-on activities. The renovation project also addressed practical needs that had been neglected for years due to budget constraints and bureaucratic inertia. The castle's kitchen facilities were completely modernized to meet contemporary health and safety standards while maintaining their ability to provide both intimate family meals and large-scale entertaining for hundreds of guests. Staff quarters throughout the castle were improved significantly, reflecting Charles's belief that people who served the monarchy deserved comfortable, dignified working conditions. Modern amenities were added to residential areas, while working spaces were designed to promote efficiency and job satisfaction among the dedicated individuals who kept the castle functioning smoothly. As winter progressed into spring, the renovation project began to reveal its full scope and ambition. Charles had successfully created spaces that honored the castle's historical significance while adapting it for 21st century use. More importantly, he had demonstrated that tradition and innovation could work together harmoniously, when guided by clear vision and genuine respect for both past and future. The king's personal touches were evident throughout the completed areas, from the organic garden produce displayed in the kitchens to the contemporary artworks that complemented classical portraits. Every room told a story about his values and priorities, while maintaining the dignity and beauty expected of a royal residence. Family members began spending more time at the renovated castle, drawn by the successful combination of comfort and grandeur that made it feel like home rather than just another official building. The children especially enjoyed exploring newly accessible areas and learning about their family's history through the interactive displays that brought centuries of royal tradition to life in engaging, age-appropriate ways. The success of the personal and family-focused renovations validated Charles's belief that the monarchy could modernize without losing its essential character. By creating spaces that served both official functions and intimate family needs, he had shown that royal tradition could evolve to meet contemporary expectations while preserving the dignity and continuity that gave the institution its unique value in British society. The official unveiling of the renovated Windsor Castle was scheduled for a perfect spring morning in May, exactly 1 year after King Charles had first walked through these corridors with Lady Margaret Thornbury, envisioning the transformation that was now complete. The extensive planning for this momentous day had occupied the palace staff for months, as they prepared to showcase not just interior decoration, but a fundamental reimagining of how the British monarchy could function in the modern world. Charles stood in the Great Hall, now transformed into a space that seamlessly blended medieval grandeur with contemporary functionality, and felt a profound sense of achievement. Every detail reflected careful consideration of how the monarchy could serve the British people more effectively while preserving the traditions and dignity that gave the institution its unique character and constitutional authority. The guest list for the unveiling ceremony represented the breadth of Charles's vision for an inclusive monarchy. Alongside foreign dignitaries, government officials, and members of the royal family, the invitation list included representatives from every sector of British society. Teachers, healthcare workers, environmental scientists, craftspeople, and ordinary citizens who had contributed to the renovation project would witness the formal presentation of their collective achievement. Lady Margaret arrived early that morning, accompanied by members of her design team who had worked tirelessly throughout the challenging project. She felt a mixture of pride and relief as she surveyed the completed spaces, knowing that they had successfully created something unprecedented in royal history, a palace that functioned as both a living museum and a working family home. The media attention was extraordinary, with broadcasters from around the world positioned throughout the castle grounds to document this historic moment. Unlike the negative coverage during the project's early controversial phase, the current reporting focused on the renovation's achievements and its broader significance for the future of constitutional monarchy in democratic societies. The ceremony began in the throne room, where Charles had insisted on creating a more accessible and welcoming atmosphere without sacrificing the dignity required for state occasions. The ancient throne remained at the center of the space, but the surrounding areas now encouraged interaction and conversation rather than formal distance and intimidation. Archbishop of Canterbury opened the ceremony with a blessing that acknowledged the castle's role as both a spiritual and secular center of national life. His words emphasized themes of service, stewardship, and the responsibility that comes with privilege, reflecting Charles's understanding of monarchy as a form of public service rather than personal entitlement. Prime Minister Thompson spoke next, praising the renovation project as an example of how traditional institutions could adapt to contemporary needs without losing their essential purpose. His Majesty has shown that preservation and progress are not opposing forces, she declared, but complementary aspects of responsible leadership that benefits all our citizens. Charles's own speech was the emotional centerpiece of the ceremony. He spoke personally about his vision for the monarchy's future and how the renovated castle embodied his commitment to environmental sustainability, cultural preservation, and social inclusivity. Most movingly, he acknowledged the critics who had challenged the project and explained how their concerns had ultimately improved the final result. Every great institution must periodically examine its purpose and methods, the king said, his voice carrying clearly through the newly designed acoustic system. This renovation represents more than architectural improvement. It demonstrates our commitment to serving the British people more effectively while honoring the best traditions of our shared history. The formal tour of the renovated spaces revealed the full scope of what had been achieved. The library showcased the perfect integration of historical preservation with modern accessibility, allowing scholars and visitors to experience centuries of accumulated knowledge in settings that encouraged both research and contemplation. The family quarters demonstrated how royal life could be both dignified and genuinely comfortable, creating spaces where children could play freely while adults conducted the serious business of constitutional monarchy. The successful balance between formality and intimacy had been perhaps the project's greatest challenge, and its achievement represented a significant evolution in royal lifestyle. The archaeological discoveries were presented in specially designed exhibition spaces that allowed visitors to understand not just what had been found, but how these discoveries contributed to broader understanding of British history. Interactive displays explained medieval construction techniques, royal security measures, and the daily life of previous monarchs in ways that made history accessible to people of all ages and educational backgrounds. International guests were particularly impressed by the chapel renovations, which demonstrated how traditional religious spaces could acknowledge contemporary diversity without compromising their spiritual character. Religious leaders from various faith communities praised Charles's approach as a model for how established institutions could embrace inclusivity while maintaining their core identity and mission. The environmental features of the renovation received extensive attention during the tour. The geothermal heating system, LED lighting integrated within historically accurate fixtures, and water conservation measures demonstrated that sustainability and historical preservation could work together harmoniously. These innovations would reduce the castle's environmental impact significantly, while providing long-term cost savings that addressed earlier criticism about public spending. The most emotionally powerful moment of the ceremony occurred when Charles invited Mrs. Johnson, the Birmingham mother whose family had struggled with energy bills, to join him in cutting the ceremonial ribbon. This gesture symbolically linked the renovation project to his broader commitment to understanding and addressing the challenges facing ordinary British families. "Your Majesty," Mrs. Johnson said as photographers captured the moment, "seeing what you've created here makes me proud that our country has leaders who care about both preserving our heritage and building a better future for our children." The evening concluded with a reception that showcased British food, music, and craftsmanship in the renovated Great Hall. Local musicians performed on instruments crafted by contemporary British makers, while caterers served dishes prepared with organic produce from the castle's newly expanded gardens. Every element demonstrated Charles's commitment to supporting British talent and sustainable practices. As guests mingled throughout the beautifully restored spaces, the success of the renovation project became undeniably apparent. Conversations flowed naturally between people from different backgrounds and social levels, facilitated by the welcoming atmosphere that Lady Margaret had worked so carefully to create. The castle felt alive with possibility and purpose rather than weighed down by historical obligation. Late that evening, after the last guests had departed, Charles walked alone through the quiet corridors of his transformed home. The day's ceremony had exceeded his highest expectations, validating his belief that the monarchy could evolve without losing its essential character. More importantly, the positive public response suggested that the British people were ready to embrace this vision of modernized tradition. The renovation had taken nearly 18 months to complete and had cost significantly less than critics had claimed, thanks to careful planning and the generous contributions of craftspeople and suppliers who wanted to support the project. The archaeological discoveries had more than offset the financial investment through their contributions to historical scholarship and their attraction for international visitors. Media coverage of the unveiling ceremony was overwhelmingly positive, with commentators praising Charles's vision and Lady Margaret's execution. Editorial writers who had criticized the project during its controversial early phase now acknowledged that the results justified the investment and demonstrated the value of thoughtful institutional modernization. The transformed Windsor Castle quickly became a model for similar projects around the world, with representatives from other monarchies and historical institutions visiting to study how traditional spaces could be adapted for contemporary use. Charles found himself consulted by leaders of various countries, seeking to balance preservation with progress in their own cultural institutions. Prince William and Princess Catherine began using the renovated spaces regularly for their official duties, appreciating how the improved functionality made their work more efficient, while the enhanced comfort made their family time more enjoyable. Their children developed positive associations with the castle, seeing it as an exciting place to explore and learn rather than an intimidating symbol of duty and responsibility. The success of the Windsor Castle renovation influenced Charles's approach to other royal properties, leading to similar but smaller-scale improvements at Balmoral Castle and Sandringham House. Each project incorporated lessons learned from the Windsor experience, demonstrating that the initial investment in careful planning and public engagement yielded benefits that extended far beyond any single building. Lady Margaret Thornberry's career was transformed by the project's success, establishing her as the preeminent expert in adapting historical buildings for contemporary use. She received commissions from institutions around the world seeking to achieve similar balances between preservation and modernization, spreading British expertise in heritage conservation and contemporary design. The renovation project's legacy extended beyond architecture and interior design to influence broader discussions about the monarchy's role in modern British society. Charles had demonstrated that traditional institutions could change thoughtfully and responsively without abandoning their core purposes or values. Years later, historians would identify the Windsor Castle renovation as a turning point in the evolution of the British monarchy, the moment when an ancient institution proved its ability to adapt to contemporary expectations while preserving its essential character. The project's success established principles and precedents that would guide royal decision-making for generations to come. As Charles settled into his renovated study that final evening, surrounded by books, artwork, and furniture that reflected both his personal taste and his constitutional responsibilities, he felt confident that he had created something lasting and meaningful. The castle would serve future monarchs effectively while inspiring visitors from around the world with its demonstration that tradition and innovation could work together harmoniously. The king opened his leather-bound journal and wrote his reflections on the day's ceremony and its significance for the future. "Today we proved that preservation and progress are not enemies but allies," he noted, "and that institutions willing to evolve thoughtfully can serve their communities more effectively while honoring their finest traditions." Outside his windows, Windsor Castle's illuminated towers stood against the night sky, their ancient stones sheltering spaces that had been transformed for a new century, while remaining true to their deepest purposes. The work was complete, but its influence on the British monarchy and the nation it served would continue for generations to come.